People get ready. The fight against a jobless economy and a citizenless democracy. I'm Mike Adekunle, and this is Bookmarks. Hello and welcome to Bookmarks. I'm your host, Mike Adekunle. The technological revolution has already caused disruption in many industries, from digital cameras to Uber to self-checkout lanes. But a new book, People Get Ready, The Fight Against a Jobless Economy and a Citizenless Democracy, Robert McChesney and John Nichols argue that American democracy needs a revolution as well to keep up with technological change. Mr. McChesney joins us today via Skype. He's Gutzkel Endowed Professor of the Department of Communications at University of Illinois and hosts the program Media Matters. He and John Nichols, the nation's Washington correspondent, are founders of the media reform network Free Press and the authors of Tragedy and Farce: How the American Media Sells Wars, Spins Elections, and Destroys Democracy, and The Death and Life of American Journalism. He has written 16 books, and his work has been translated into 15 languages. And joining us to critique the book is Berin Szoka, president of Tech Freedom. Previously, he was a senior fellow and director at the Center for Internet Freedom at the Progress and Freedom Foundation. Before joining PFF, he was an associate in the communications practice group at Latham & Watkins, LLP, where he advised clients on regulations affecting the internet and telecommunications industries. He also served on the board of directors of the Space Frontier Foundation. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
So, Robert McChesney, could you please give us in a nutshell the main thesis of your book?
I'd be glad to do so. This book the idea for the book began 2.5 years ago when Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google, gave an address at the Davos conference in Switzerland to the world's financial, business, and political leaders, in which he informed the audience that Google and a number of other high-tech companies were working on a series of technologies that would revolutionize employment and labor practices in the United States and the world, and that would eliminate tens of millions of jobs within the next 1 or 2 or 3 decades. And Schmidt said that this would become the #1 political issue in the world for the next 2 or 3 decades. And when he said that, it sort of, for both my co-author John Nichols and myself, got our attention. So John came back and we decided that this was something we needed to investigate. First, we had to find out, are these claims that Schmidt and other executives and engineers were making accurate? Were they really true? And I have to confess, as an economist, from my training, I was skeptical of these claims because in the past, while technology has eliminated many jobs and sectors, over time, new areas were created that made up for the gap, and usually the new jobs were better than the old jobs. And it occurred to us, as we saw this and heard this, that this was really not just an issue about our economy or an issue about technology, but it was a political issue. That if we increase the amount of unemployment, underemployment in our economy and in other economies, it's going to lead to major political problems and political issues that would have to be solved by our democratic or our political system. And here we looked at the way our governing system currently works and our election system works, and we saw that it was really not well suited to take up this challenge to go over the best possible solution for society because of the high degree of corruption and cynicism, what we call a citizenless democracy, where most decisions are made with precious little concern for actual citizen input and are dominated by self-interest and commercial interest. Now, some people looked at the same information we looked at and drew up a very gloomy scenario that there would be no jobs at all or 50% rates of unemployment in 30 years. And we weren't really comfortable going in that direction. And the reason we weren't comfortable is that that sort of assumed that politically nothing would happen in the intervening 30 years. People would just be sitting on their couches as jobs got eliminated, and they'd wake up in the year 2047 and find out that there were far fewer jobs. In fact, nothing like that would take place. This would be a process that would demand an immediate political response or a quick political response to try to address these issues as they developed. And that's really what we talk about in the book, that we have to get ready and prepare and solve these problems that are coming at us. And the way to solve these problems, in our view, is to rejuvenate and extend our democracy and our democratic institutions to make it a citizen democracy, not a citizenless democracy. And then we can have the sort of debate, study, and citizen participation that come up with solutions so that these technological revolutions that we're in the process of experiencing can work on behalf of all the population and not just those that own the companies that benefit by them.
I would like to talk to you, Mr. Szoka. What is your critique of the book?
Well, first, I'd give Robert credit for consistency. He's been making essentially the same predictions about the future since the late 1990s, which is the same dreary doomsday scenario that the sky is falling, the AOL is going to dominate the internet and squelch free speech online. That was his prediction in the late 90s. And essentially, he's saying the same things today about Uber and the self-checkout at the grocery store and all these other technologies that he finds very scary. And his solution in all of these cases for the last 20 years has been the same, which is top-down, government-directed solutions. When he talks about citizen democracy and how we, the people, are going to manage things, what he really means is that the government planners are going to take a lead from the top down and decide how much technology is appropriate and how that technology should be evolved. So I really start from a position of skepticism about any attempt to manage the future better. I think it's pretty ironic that one of his previous books, The Life and Death of American Journalism, is an allusion to Jane Jacobs' famous book about the death and life of American cities. And it's ironic because her argument, she wasn't a libertarian, she wasn't on the right, she was a hero to the left, but her argument was really that we can't trust central planners to manage America's cities and that we should look to the bottom-up solutions by which things grow organically. And that's really my worldview too. You don't have to be a libertarian or a conservative or believe in free markets to recognize that things like Uber and new technologies, sure, they may raise some concerns, but we can actually deal with them, and we need to look at the good news, which is totally absent from all of his books, and actually understand how they empower people. So if you just look at Uber, right? I mean, Uber has been an enormously democratizing force, not just bringing down the cost and making rides better for people, but also addressing a lot of the social justice concerns that people have long had about taxis, right? The fact is that the taxi system wasn't just inefficient and monopolistic, created by the government. It was also racially discriminatory. You couldn't get a cab if you were from a certain area or from a certain skin color. And technology, not because anybody intended it to, has in fact solved some of those problems. It's created some other problems, of course. But the fact is people adapt, just as people have always adapted for centuries. And the concerns that people like Robert have raised and the Luddites before him have never really borne out to be the case. And we've always found ways of dealing with concerns that he's raised. So I don't think that the future is perfect. I think we have reason to be concerned about some things. But we should be rationally optimistic, and we should start from a position that says that people will figure things out, and that we need to figure out, of course, a role for government to protect consumers from real harms. But we don't need what he's arguing for, which is essentially a top-down approach to deciding whether new technology is going to be allowed, and then trying to bolt onto those concerns the same Marxist concerns that he's been making for 20 years.
Okay. Robert, so two things I really want you to respond to. Do you believe that it is possible that we would adapt by ourselves. It would take its natural course, and we would adapt, and these problems will just go away. And two, is that really your position, that it has to be from the top down, the government deciding what's going to happen in terms of how technology comes about?
Let's talk a little bit about, first of all, the data in this book about technology is not coming from the Rosa Luxemburg Institute. I dare say, had this critic read the book closely, they'd say there's a very substantial argument being taken here that's engaging with people who are shared his political views, who are concerned about these issues, and we're engaging with them on these issues. And it's a very serious debate. So let's take the case of Uber, which he mentions. I agree completely that Uber, in theory, the idea of an Uber-type system could be a very good system. There's nothing in our book attacking Uber per se. In fact, we're not attacking technology per se, which is a ludicrous claim made by someone, again, who I don't think has read the book very carefully, if at all. But I do think we can say this about something like Uber. Uber right now, the CEO of Uber and the management has made it quite clear their goal is eventually with their Uber technology to shift to driverless vehicles relatively soon, as soon as possible. And for businesses, it makes perfect sense to substitute out driverless vehicles for vehicles with drivers. Now, in the case of Uber, they plan to shift, their plan ideally is to shift to entirely driverless vehicles using the same software and algorithms they're currently using. This makes their model so successfully. Now, I would agree completely with my critic, Mr. Szoka, that you could make a strong case for driverless vehicles. I mean, I think you could say environmentally, they would make much less wear and tear on the environment. You could have much less traffic jams, virtually no traffic accidents. People who can't currently drive, people with handicaps could suddenly get around, older people, people with diseases. You can make a strong case for an Uber-type system with driverless vehicles as being great for society. In fact, we acknowledge that. We think there are pretty powerful cases for that. And that's just one example. I'm using that as the example he raises. Here's the problem, though. This is where the social issue comes in. That will not, to our knowledge, be magically resolved by another entrepreneur. It is that the number one job for men in the American economy, by far, is driving a vehicle of one kind or another, be it a taxi cab, a delivery vehicle, a truck, a bus, a van. It's the number one job for men. In some states, it's the number one job by far. So, it's up there. Number 2 and 3 are barely in the rearview mirror, pun intended. And if we do have a situation where most of these jobs are eliminated, that's a lot of jobs for a lot of men. Now, in theory, and I was one of the people who studied the same economics Mr. Szoka studied, in theory, and in the past, there would be a period of dislocation in which there would be, these people would suffer, but new industries would come along, which would create more jobs or as many jobs, and they'd oftentimes be better jobs, and everyone eventually would live happily ever after the brief period of dislocation. But what we're seeing instead is that theory doesn't seem to hold here. And again, I'm not taking this from the collected works of Lenin or Stalin or whatever left-wing guru I'm allegedly following. This is stuff that's being discussed by leading mainstream economists. This is stuff that's is being debated in the top circles, even of corporate executives acknowledging this. There's no jobs on the horizon. There's no new industries that are creating lots of jobs. I mean, one of the ironies of the technological revolution is that it doesn't create as many jobs as it replaces. This is an empirical question. It's not an ethical, political value judgment question. And there's nothing on the horizon that suggests that's going to change. That becomes a major political problem. When societies have significant unemployment and underemployment, there's not been a society in history, including our own, that has the bulk of the population saying, hey, let's do absolutely nothing, sit back here and hope that our private sector friends will find jobs for us. And in the meantime, we'll starve. It doesn't work that way. In the meantime, we'll be in poverty. It is a political issue. And how we address it is a political concern. Now, Mr. Szoka has jumped ahead to the fact that I want some sort of central commissar to boss everyone around, is what he alleges, I'm assuming in the book. to the exact contrary to people who might actually read the book. You see, the bulk of the book doesn't propose exactly how to solve the problem, because we don't exactly know how to solve the problem any more than Mr. Szoka does. What we propose instead, though, is it's imperative that we rejuvenate democratic institutions so we actually have a debate over how best to solve the problem, because our current governing structures are very ill-suited to solving it, as they're largely owned by, dominated by the companies that benefit by automation and are the ones who will reap the immediate rewards of it, not by people who are going to be the losers.
Okay. So yeah, Mr. Szoka, in fairness, in the book, Mr. McChesney and Mr. Nichols, they do talk about a lot of the positives from technology.
Not much. I actually did read the book, and I apologize if it sounded like I didn't, Robert, because you're absolutely right that there are two things going on here, and let's be clear about this. And he actually, I think, quite accurately separates them. There is a debate about the nature of economics and the way that the economy is evolving. And then there's a separate debate about what to do about it, right? And we very much disagree about the latter. I don't think that my characterization of his views on that point is at all unfair. You can read the book for yourself, and you can decide what label you want to give to his views. He's absolutely right that there's another debate here about what is actually happening in the economy. And that is a debate that is separate from politics, and he's absolutely right that people across the political spectrum are very concerned, as he is. Right? And so to that, I would say, let's just separate the politics out of this for just a moment. Tyler Cowen, Peter Thiel, there are certainly people on the political right who in many ways share his pessimism. They may not share his exact solutions, but they start from that position. And that's where I really take issue. And I think that that mentality is a mentality that across the political spectrum we've seen for centuries. It is a fundamentally, if you will, conservative mentality that says essentially that the past was not necessarily great, but it was good enough, and that the future is really scary, and that we, the wise technocrats that are elected through the democratic process that he talks about, can manage the process of technological change to make sure things turn out better. And again, as I say, you could have people on the left or the right think that they would do a better job as technocrats deciding how technology is going to evolve. We have been through these sorts of debates in the past, and again and again and again, the naysayers have been proven wrong. And this is why I cite his earlier works. I mean, he has raised the same sort of doomsday scenario about the media and the internet now for 2 decades, and he's been wrong every time.
But to be fair, there's specific examples of how in the past, like you said, there's usually like a vacuum. There's a period where people will suffer, but then there's some kind of shift. New jobs will be created somehow in new industry, but we're not seeing that right now. So are we supposed to just fold our arms and wait for something to happen?
No, it's a fair question. As he points out, it's largely an empirical question. So I would say on that point, if you actually look at the data, so Pew, for example, did a survey recently of economists and technologists. And in fact, there's a sharp debate. I mean, he would have you believe that there's a clear consensus that somehow that there are no new jobs being created. In fact, there's a debate among economists and technologists about what exactly is happening. And I would say that there is always a bias in those debates because we're looking at aggregates. And economics, and again, this is where I think he's absolutely right, that my critique is not in fact of the radical left. It's of the way that people think about economics in general as a series of aggregates. I mean, if you believe that gross domestic product is a thing, it can be very easy to fall into the trap of measuring that because you study the way that we produce things in the past, and you look at a basket of consumer goods. That's what the Department of Labor does when it measures the economy. Well, all I'm saying is that those sorts of aggregates really miss out on the way that the fundamental changes in the economy. So if you look, for example, at someone who drives for Uber, right? And you just measure the traditional aggregates we're measuring, and you look at them through the paradigm of a 9-to-5 job, you are not seeing the way that they have become entrepreneurs. The way the gig economy works, that someone might drive for Uber as one gig and do something else as another, is in fact that individual people are being empowered. And if you just talk to Uber drivers, they're not doing it because they're being exploited or because they don't have some better option. They're doing it because they're entrepreneurial people who are using technology to create a new way of working for them that works for their schedule, that allows them deal with their kids during the day, to drive when it's really profitable to do so because surge pricing rewards them. I mean, those are all things on the micro level that actually should make us a lot more comfortable and positive about technological change.
I'd like to clarify again. I'm being cast, when we get past the red baiting, then I'm being cast as this total pessimist who all my books are doom and gloom books. I'm not optimistic in the sense that I think that we can just turn it over to the large corporations, let them do what they're doing with their politicians, they bankroll, and everything will work out. If that's the definition of optimism, don't count me in. But I'm optimistic that if we rejuvenate our democratic institutions, these technologies are extraordinary. I'm not an anti-technology person by any means whatsoever, nor is John Nichols in this book. But I think an example where we disagree in emphasis and approach is looking at the gig economy. The gig economy, to me, isn't something we should be all too excited about. It's a point of desperation when there aren't any good jobs out there. This is what you're reduced to, is a job where you basically have no pension, no paid vacation, no health care. You're on your own, basically, winging it.
A lot of the critics of the gig economy, using Uber as an example, would have you believe that people are driving for Uber, essentially as slave wages. They're working in the mines all day, and they're getting screwed for it. But in fact, the data are very clear. 50% of Uber drivers work under 10 hours a week. 85% of Lyft drivers work under 15 hours a week. The point is, these are people who are not working in the majority of cases full time on that. They're using this new platform as a tool of empowerment that allows them to supplement their income and to find a way to make money in their spare time. And if you want to really study this, I really invite you to do what I do, which is anytime you get in an Uber or a Lyft, talk to the driver, understand their experience from a really human perspective. So I'm really curious. When I read the book, I really wanted to ask Robert this question. So do you like the fact that in New Jersey and the state of Washington, you are not allowed to pump your own gas, where the government has decided that it's not going to automate that function. We're going to have people who are employed to pump gas for you. I don't like that because it means I pay more. I may be able to afford it, but people who are on the margins really can't. And my second question is, you could say exactly the same thing about the self-checkout machines in grocery stores. I mean, in the state of California, you almost never find them because the unions are so powerful in that state that they've managed to keep them out. But once again, this is the economic point I'm trying to make here. There are two ways of looking at this. You could look at those technologies, self-pumping your own gas and checking out your own groceries, and you could say, well, look at the job that's being lost. I see that cost to the economy. Or the more sophisticated economic analysis would look at that and realize that by cutting those unnecessary things out of the system, you're lowering prices for everybody. And the people that benefit from that are the people on the bottom of the ladder, for whom it makes the biggest difference that their groceries are now just a few pennies cheaper. I mean, you don't know anything about it.
The book isn't about Uber today. The book isn't about checkout robots today or whatever, that self-checkout. The book is about what happens in an economy where we're going to lose a huge percentage of jobs in the visible future, and what the political challenges that going to be. And you're telling us basically sit back and let the corporations and the status quo keep doing their thing and everything will work out for the better, because that's the way it's always worked in the past.
I think it's telling me
that's just not going to work.
He wouldn't answer my question. I mean, these are two examples of automation that are very salient to every American, right? People, when they drive through New Jersey, they understand what's happened there. The government has mandated this crazy system where in order to preserve a certain number of jobs, everybody else pays more for gasoline. The same thing has happened through union power in places like California, where self-checkout machines have been limited at grocery stores. These are two really simple examples. Of course, they're not in his book because they don't support his point, right? And they are examples.
What is my point? That's not my point. I wasn't making a point that we should do that. So it's not in the book. It's not a point, but it's the only point you've got to talk about because you can't talk about the book.
No, Robert, my point is that those illustrate, or ought to illustrate for all of us, that people find ways of dealing with these things. That sure, some jobs disappear, just as many jobs disappeared when the horse and buggy industry disappeared, right? The economy is constantly in flux.
All right, as we can see, we're getting pretty heated here, but let's take some questions from our viewers. And I have a question from Bruce Carpenter, and it goes, technology has always improved standards of living, Why do you think it will be different this time?
Well,
McChesney.
it doesn't have to be different this time. I think, in fact, as we conclude in chapter 2, after a long discussion of this issue, there's no reason it can't radically improve. We could have a phenomenal increase in the broad standard of living in our society and have the resources to tackle the most vexing problems that face us, like climate change and environmental issues. We have that capacity. What we argue, though, is in the current political economy, that there's a high likelihood that won't take place, and not due to conspiracy, but rather what we see is that the technological advances in the current political economy are not going to translate into higher standards of living for the great bulk of people or for the society as a whole. And let me put this, because again, the context of the book is somewhat different than the static view that's being given, as I think Mr. Szoka put it so accurately, but perhaps ironically. I think what's going to happen is that if we lose jobs and they aren't replaced, or they're replaced very slowly, and I don't think there's no evidence they'll be replaced by much that's going to have a great deal of buying power, we're going to have a situation with growing unemployment, underemployment, which is already a pretty bad situation globally, and there's not many prognoses that see it improving dramatically, except maybe at the Manhattan Institute. And if that is the case, we're going to have political upheaval. We're seeing it already this year. We're seeing it in both political parties. We're seeing it across the political spectrum. The natives are restless around this country. The bulk of the people who aren't inside the Beltway, they're not in Manhattan, they're not in Silicon Valley, they're not rich. All across the political spectrum, they're not liking the way this economy is going. It's just beginning. And if we look historically at societies where there's high unemployment, we see there's certain key historical trends. We discussed this in the book at some length. We see the growth of the need for government to intervene in one way or another so people will work.
Okay. And unfortunately, with that, we are out of time. That's all we have time for. Again, the book is People Get Ready, The Fight Against a Jobless Economy and a Citizenless Democracy by Robert McChesney and John Nichols. Thank you, Mr. McChesney, for joining us to discuss the book, and to Berin Szoka of Tech Freedom for his critique. And thank you for watching Bookmarks. I'm Mike Adekunle, and we'll see you next time.